To start with, so we can bring our focus to music, I would like to share a short video with you from the Children of Youth Orchestra of Los Angeles, YOLA, who are being conducted in an ensemble by Gustavo Dudamel, the current conductor and music director of the LA Philharmonic. And while you're watching this video, I want you to probably pay attention to what it takes for a child to play a musical instrument in the presence of others and coordinate and follow the conductor's instruction. So let's take a look.
Sit well. Let's sit proud, huh? And one, Wonderful.
So they're very cute and adorable, of course, but if you have noticed, they do a lot of variety of things to accomplish this task. A child has to follow musical notations and translate these abstract symbols to meaningful sound by adjusting their finger movements on an instrument. They have to listen to themselves. They have to follow a rhythm. They have to remember nuances of a musical piece. And since they're playing with others, they have to synchronize their beat with others, their rhythm with others. They have to connect and interact emotionally with other children, and they also have to attend to the conductor and follow the instructions. And we know that many regions of the brain are involved to accomplish this task. So this is the image of the brain. You're looking at it from the side, and just generally the sensory region, motor regions of the brain, the temporal areas of the brain, the affective and emotion system of the brain, and also the decision-making systems of the brain are involved so we can play a musical instrument. And you may think that maybe involvement and engagement of these regions from early childhood may have some benefit to child development. And some of you may have anecdotal stories from yourselves, from your family members, that yes, music training helps children. What do we know about that? From early infancy, we know that engagement in active music making helps infants. For example, 6-month-old infants who have been involved in active music making, like a mommy and me class, when they get to touch instruments, when they get to sing along, when they are moved together with other infants, show better pre-linguistic communicative gestures, which are fundamental to language development, and better social behavior. As simple as synchronously moving a child with another experimenter. So if you just strap a baby, there is an experimenter, and you move that child in a synchronous manner with that experimenter, the infants show more altruistic and prosocial behavior towards that experimenter. And beat perception and production and rhythm production and synchrony is innate to children. A few weeks ago, I was walking in the park, and I saw this little kid playing drums. And I just wanted to share this, that how much he's in tune in following beat and rhythm and emotionally connect with other musicians. Pretty prosocial child, I'd say. He's looking at others. What about other skills? What about language development, cognitive development? One of the building blocks of language development is what we call phonological awareness, or understanding the structure of the sound of the word, whether children would recognize if two words rhyme with each other, or whether words would begin with the same sound or not. And we know that children who have been involved in music training for as short as 6 months are better in phonological awareness. We also have evidence that participation in music training is associated with increasing IQ and cognitive control and increase in verbal intelligence. In terms of social behavior, we know that participating in joint music making, if you just have children walk around a circle and all drum together in a joint task, would relate to better social behavior towards others. So if you did, after this drumming task, you put them in an experiment where they have to help each other, they show more cooperative and helpful behavior towards one another. And in terms of empathy, meaning to recognize the feeling of others and share that feeling, if you just ask questions like, this is an index of empathy questionnaire, questions like, it makes me sad to see a girl who can't find anyone to play with, and see if a child agrees with that or disagree, children who have had music training show better performance on empathy scale compared to their counterparts. One question that remains is, where does this come from? Is it predisposition genetics? Some people are just better with auditory skills, musical skills, maybe even memory and cognitive skills. Or is it the effect of music training itself? Or probably the combination and interaction of these two? One of the things that I decided to work in my lab with my collaborators about 6 years ago, we decided to look at this question specifically. Basically, to look at the effects of systematic group-based music training in children starting between age to 6 to 7, and then follow them systematically over the course of 5 years to see what happens to their development. Not only their cognitive development, but their social, emotional, and brain development as a result of music training. This work is in collaboration with the Los Angeles Philharmonic and their youth orchestra program, the children you observed before. This is one of our participants over the years with an electroencephalography cap. So we have been seeing about 85 children. They're part of their music training is provided by the LA Phil. This is a free music training program that is offered to underserved communities of Los Angeles 4 days a week, very high quality, very intense program. We also have control groups because we know every child gets better with reading and language abilities and cognitive abilities as a result of development. And we also wanted to know if the effect that we are seeing, is it related to just participating in any activity that is fun and engaging, or is it just specific to music? Therefore, we have 2 control groups, children from community sports program and children who were not part of any specific enrichment program. They would just do the regular schedule, going to school, coming home. Since then, first we tested every group and made sure that there were no significant differences between them to begin with, just to give them an equal start. Since then, we have been seeing them once a year. They come to our laboratory, and we have been testing them with psychometric measures and neuroimaging to look at their social and emotional development, their cognitive development and development of executive function skills, and correlated changes in the structure and the function of their brain. It's quite challenging for those of you who work with young children to keep them in the MRI scanner. But I'd say after 5 years, they have all become professional subjects. They're telling me how to do it. Okay, so let's touch on some of these findings that we've had, starting with the brain. Here is an image of the brain. You're looking at the brain from the side, the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. And the areas we're going to be focusing on are areas of the primary and secondary auditory cortices. These are areas that process sound information. Music is a type of sound, language is a type of sound, communication is a type of sound. So the brain doesn't really distinguish what type of sound it is. It processes sound information in these primary and secondary regions. What we do is we try to look at the amount of cortex in these areas. We get kind of slice by slice by slice of the brain images and look at how much cortex is there. We know that typical development is associated with decrease of cortical thickness in almost all areas of the brain. What we have found out is that music training has a neuroplastic effect of preserving cortex in these specific areas of the brain. And again, this is a neuroplastic effect that was resulted from music training because these areas are being associated and stimulated by music. However, again, these areas are important for language development, for speech perception and production, and also for perception of prosody, detection of emotion during communication. If you can communicate with someone and you can detect that they're angry or they're sad, you probably have a much more effective and successful relationship with them. What about other prosocial skills? One of the things that we are very interested in is beat synchronization. I showed you earlier that even moving a child synchronously with others seems to have some prosocial effect on that child. We have the children do a drumming task where they tap on drums with an experimenter. All they have to do is to follow the beat on the drum. Followed by that, we have them to do a prosocial task. They play with the experimenter in kind of an activity that we have to achieve. They have to achieve a common goal. Let's say building a castle with blocks. Let me show you just a video of the drumming task. You would see a child starting from year 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you can notice that her drumming skills and her synchronization gets better with her music training.
And 2, and 1, 2, ready, go. And 2, and 1, 2, ready, play.
And 2, and 1, 2, ready, play.
So, although every group of children improved in drumming and synchronization, we saw the most improvement in children who have had music training. Their degree of synchronization significantly gets better from year 1 to year 4. Now, what about the prosocial task? This is a task that they have to build a castle. At some point, the experimenter, intentionally on our part, runs out of the blocks. And we'll see if a child is willing to share their blocks or their toys to accomplish the task, or they're just going to want to play by themselves. So not only the children who have had music training, their synchronization rate got better. That synchronization predicted their level of prosociality. The more synchronized they were with the experimenter, the more they were willing to share their toys. And we have adjusted the task by their age, so the task gets more interesting and more complicated as they get older. But basically, the more synchronized they were with another person, the more prosocial they are. Going back to empathy, empathy is the ability to understand and to share feelings of others. We test empathy with providing children with short videos. During these videos, the protagonist generally goes through a difficult situation. It could be sad, it could be angry. In this video, some of you may be familiar with, this child has lost her best friend. And we ask the children 2 questions. How do you think the person in the movie is feeling? And how do you feel? If these 2 answers match, they get a score in empathy. And if they don't match, they don't get a score in empathy, and we probably try to have a conversation with their parents of why the child is sad and you're feeling happy. What we have seen with children who have had music training, their score of empathy goes higher, more significantly than the other groups. And you can associate that when a child plays music, especially if you remember that first video, they have to look at the facial expressions of the conductor, of other players, and emotionally connect and integrate their own emotions with them. And we think that has something to do with this increased level of empathy in children who have had music training. Looking at the parents, how do the parents feeling as a result of putting their child into this program? As I said, this is a pretty intense program. They have to go every day. But what we have found out, that parents of children who have been in music training on 2 scores, on assessing how aggressive their children are and how hyperactive they are, from the beginning of the program to 5 years later, only children who have participated in the music group, their parents show that they feel that their children are significantly less aggressive and less hyperactive. We see similar profile in the children from the other groups, but not as significant. In relation to more general cognitive abilities and executive function skills, a lot of you may be familiar with, are a set of abilities that are a pretty good predictor of success in future, academic success, general life success. And these are abilities like task switching, being able to go between tasks, and response inhibition or impulse control, the ability to stopping yourself from something immediately right now for a better reward in the future. And you may be familiar with the marshmallow task for very, very young children, but we do this all the time. We were at the break. You could have decided whether you want another second cookie or wait for dinner. That's a form of response inhibition. We test response inhibition with giving children quarters and M&Ms. And unfortunately, sugar is a really, really good way to test inhibition and impulse control. We present them with 3 scenarios, and we basically change the size of the future reward. Whether you want 1 M&M now or 2 in the future time, 1 now or 4 in the future time, or 1 now or 6 in the future time. They don't know that if they just get 2 quarters, they can buy a bag of M&Ms from the vending machine. So that's still the beauty of working with young children. What we have found out with children who have had music training, as the size of the rewards gets larger, they tend to wait longer for it. So when the size of the reward is small, 1 versus 2, half of the time they decide to have the M&Ms or the quarters, and the other half they decide to wait. However, when the reward is larger, is 1 versus 6 in the future, almost 100% of the time, children who have had music training wait for the larger and better reward in the future. We do not see this differentiation in children who are not part of a systematic enrichment program. So no matter what the size of the reward is, sometimes they tend to wait, and sometimes they tend to wanting to have the reward immediately. With children in the sports group, they kind of fall in the middle. They are doing better than the control group of children who don't participate in any activity. They're not doing as good as the music group. That's not to say that music is better than sports. Each one of these activities provide enrichment to different abilities and skills of a child, and we have to look at all of these as a whole child development. We heard earlier this morning how physical activity and participation in sports is as important. They're just targeting different abilities and skills. Another way that we test inhibition inside the MRI scanner, we have to kind of make this simplified task, is using a task that is called the color word Stroop task. This is simple. You can all participate. I'm going to show you a word. You're going to have to name aloud the color of the word. Okay, ready? Okay. So that's the inhibition. A congruent would be the word blue in color blue. Incongruent would be the word green in the color yellow. You have to inhibit yourself from reading and actually naming the color of the word. And we know that the engagement of the frontal circuits of the brain are involved in doing this inhibition. When we compare children in the MRI scanner and their brain function while they were doing this activity, this is comparison of children who are in the music group compared to the control group. This is the left side of the brain, the outer side, the inner side, the right hemisphere. And the bottom line here is that we see more engagement and higher activation of the frontal circuits of the brain in children who have had music training compared to the control group. This is not something you practice during music training. You don't go to music to learn how to do inhibition or impulse control. But it seems that there is this non-musical benefits of music training that extends to other abilities that are very, very important later in life for decision-making, cognitive control, and success in future. Another thing that we are very interested in is how different parts of the brain are connected with each other. So not only the development of the structures of the brain, but the connectivity between the two. Some of you may be familiar. This is diffusion-weighted imaging of the connections, white matter networks of the brain. These are white matter bundles that basically transmit information between different structures of the brain. One of these fiber bundles that we are very interested in is called the corpus callosum. You're looking at the brain from the top here. This is the front of the brain. This is the back, as if you're looking from the top. The corpus callosum connects the left and the right side of the brain, the left and right hemispheres. It facilitates communication between the brain hemispheres. We looked at the degree of connectivity of this specific pathway when children all started at the baseline, and there were no significant differences between the groups. After only 2 years of music training, we see more significant connectivity, more robust connectivity in different parts of this pathway, including the frontal part, the sensory part, and the motor part, meaning that the connection between areas of sensory and motor regions and the frontal regions of the brain is stronger in children who have had music training. Probably has something to do specifically in the sensory and motor region of the coordination of the both hands, of having to coordinate your ear, your auditory, and your motor outcome. But also, again, there is connectivity, higher connectivity in the frontal parts of the brain that are not necessarily engaged. They're not part of your music learning regimen, but it seems to have these non-musical impacts. So what I told you today is a summary of how music training is associated from early infancy to social and emotional outcome in children, to early enhancement of cognitive skills and executive function skills, and even engagement of the frontal and prefrontal regions of the brain, and then neuroplastic changes of the brain tissue in the temporal areas, but also in the more robust connectivity of the left and the right hemisphere. Despite all of this, in the state of California, which is a pretty progressive state, the situation with music education is pretty dire. Our student to music teacher ratio in California is about 700 students to one teacher during elementary school. And this is even less for children from minorities, ethnic minorities, and racial minorities. During the past 20 years, children from low socioeconomic background and racial and ethnic minorities have lost about half of their access to music education. So it seems that, as the awardees panel discussed before, we do have the education, we do have the science, but somehow that doesn't get translated into our policy and decision making in terms of what is good for education. And I hope what I have shared with you today brings some attention to that. Music training doesn't have to be conservatory training. This is the group that I study, group of children, 30 to 40 of them with a music teacher, and it's not the outcome of music training is not for every child to become Gustavo Dudamel or to become a musician. It's for them to learn how to play, how to have a fun and engaging activity, and use some of the skills that they learn and translate it into other outcomes of life. So, and this is not just related to classical music training. Any music from any culture, as long as it has engagement of other individuals and adults with children, probably will have the same impact. I want to leave you with another short video of the same children you saw earlier. That was about 6 or 7 years ago. Now they're a little bit more adult, and this is what they think music is doing for them in their life.
When I play in an orchestra, it's the most incredible feeling ever. It's you and your colleagues coming together to make awesome music. And it's just that. You're not worried about tomorrow's dinner. You're not worried about tonight's homework. It's literally just you focusing on every note that you're playing and telling a story with each note.
You have the different harmonies, different melodies going on at the same time, creating something new that you don't really hear every day.
All these different instruments combined and they all work together, and it's kind of like how life is.
Learning an instrument by itself is the best, and then when you get to learn it with other people, you get to make new friends, and it's great.
Even though we come from places that people think nothing is possible, we're creating something that's like really beautiful. Everybody can do what they want to do. If they just push themselves and just motivate themselves, then they can motivate others like we're doing.
Great. So with that, I would like to acknowledge our Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge our funding partners and also direct your attention to our laboratory, the Brain and Creativity Institute at USC. We have a lot of resources on our lab website about access to music education in Los Angeles, different youth orchestras that you can connect with, and I'll be happy to connect with you individually if you want to talk to me afterwards to different programs that we have. And thank you for listening.